Hey friends, thanks so much for joining us. I'm very excited to have on the line author, host of the Peter Schiff Show, and the CEO and Chief Global Strategist of Euro-Pacific Capital, the one and only Peter Schiff. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure to be on with you.
Well, it's just a real pleasure to have you. I sure do have a lot of admiration for your ability to be consistent over time and to speak truth to power. I kind of consider you one of the powerful folks and powerful voices out there in terms of the truth media. But when I see you on Larry Kudlow's show on CNBC and Fox Business, I see you consistently speaking truth and telling the truth about the Fed, whereas many of your counterparts aren't willing to do that. Where do you find the moral fortitude and courage to do that, Peter?
Well, it doesn't really take all that much courage. I think it's easier for me to speak the truth than to just lie. I think part of the problem is a lot of the other people that go on these shows legitimately don't understand the truth. I don't think most of the other financial pundits that sing the Fed's praises, I don't think they're being disingenuous. I think they actually believe this nonsense. I mean, that's the problem. It's been indoctrinated, pounded in their heads for so many years, and they have such a vested interest in believing it. Their whole life is based on believing it, that psychologically they're just not even open to the idea that they're wrong.
That's interesting because I've wondered that very same thing. Are they being intellectually dishonest, or are they just being foolish? And I think so many people are invested in this system and, profit from the stock market and profit from this system. They're so ingrained in it and they see themselves as a part of it that they're not willing to be honest about the history of the Fed. I mean, if we looked at the Federal Reserve's 100-year track record, it's been abysmal, as you've pointed out in interview after interview. And last week's announcement on Wednesday that QE will continue with $85 billion going to domestic and international banks, I guess they're just going to do it in perpetuity, huh?
Well, they're going to keep on blowing air into the bubble until it bursts. They're going to keep interest rates low as long as they can get away with it. But the only thing that will stop them will be a currency crisis. I don't see any other reason for them to do it. I know that we're never going to get legitimate economic growth based on the policies that we have today. That's what's so crazy. I mean, forget about understanding the last 100 years of history, which very few people do. And if anything, they're rewriting history. They've been indoctrinated to believe things that didn't actually happen. But just the recent history, for so many people to believe that the Fed can keep interest rates artificially low, right? We can have an economy that's built on this cheap money. We can inflate asset bubbles and have all this excess consumption that is dependent on the inflated asset values and the flow of cheap money, and then believe that the Fed can take away the cheap money and that asset prices are going to stay levitated, that we're going to keep on spending even though we can't borrow. People don't understand the phony nature of the recovery. I hear people say that, hey, it's either way, it's great. If the Fed keeps interest rates low, then everything is great for the markets. And if they raise rates, it's only because there's an economic recovery, and that's also good for the markets. But they don't understand that recovery is impossible without the low interest rates. And it's not even a real recovery. The only way to get a real recovery is to allow a real recession, which will begin if the Fed allows interest rates to rise. But that's not going to be good for the stock market. It's not going to be good for the real estate market. It will be good for the long-term health of the economy. But the Fed is not interested in what's good for the long term for the economy. It's trying to perpetrate or sustain the bubble that we have now so we can keep on borrowing and spending, right, with reckless abandon without any regard for our future, so that we can keep the stock market and the real estate market inflated so we can all believe that we're wealthy even though we're broke. So the Fed has to maintain the illusion, and the only way to do that is with the drug of QE, so we stay high, so we're oblivious to reality. Meanwhile, everybody is waiting. When is the Fed going to raise rates? When are they going to taper? When are they going to shrink their balance sheet? When all of that is impossible. Meanwhile, the world thinks that, the fact that our markets are going up is indicative of economic strength. It's not. It's not indicative of anything other than a bubble.
Well, I wonder the same thing, and one of my questions for you is about the stock market. A lot of people say, well, all of you doomers, that's a label that's often thrown our way when we talk about truth. All of you doomers talk about hyperinflation, and yet there's absolutely no signs of hyperinflation. Where's all this inflation you speak of? And I've been saying, at least for the last year, Peter, that it's in the stock market. And I guess my question to you is, when will we see inflation that's now in the stock market creep into the real economy? Because if I was one of these guys making millions and millions and millions of dollars in my stocks, sooner or later, I'm going to buy real tangible assets in the real world, and that money's going to flow into the real economy. I mean, do you agree with me? Is that where the inflation currently is in the stock market?
It is in assets. It's in the stock market. It's in the bond market. It's in the real estate market. So asset prices have been inflated, right? The cheap money has been going into assets. But I would just disagree that it's not in consumer prices. It is. It's just not showing up in the CPI the way the government measures consumer prices. But if you actually look at the prices consumers are paying for the things that they're buying, they're going up much faster than the CPI. Mm-hmm. So I don't believe that there's no inflation showing up in consumer prices. I think the government is giving everybody a way to attack people like me by saying, oh, Peter Schiff is wrong because he said there'd be inflation. And look, the CPI shows that there's no inflation. The CPI is wrong. There is inflation. Inflation is there. It's pushing up consumer prices. It's just not being captured by the CPI. So I think actual prices are rising much more rapidly than the government admits. But also another factor that is preventing consumer prices from rising even faster than that is our ability to export our inflation to other countries. And the way that process works is the Fed prints money, and then the government uses it, but it prints money to buy government bonds. The government then sends out unemployment checks, food stamps, welfare, whatever it is. Then Americans take that money and go to Walmart and they buy stuff made in China. So now the money goes to China, right? And now what happens? China, the Chinese government prints up its own money to buy up those dollars, which it then uses to buy U.S. treasuries. But now the Chinese citizens take that newly printed money and they go and they buy goods with it. So now you have an inflation problem in China, but it emanated in the United States. We send our money to China, our inflation, and they send their products here. So the goods are in America, keeping prices low. The money is in China, bidding prices up. So we're able to export it, not just to China, but to all the countries that we have trade deficits with, which is pretty much everybody. They send us their stuff. We send them our inflation, our printed money. And so we get a pass. But this isn't going to go on forever. Our trading partners are going to wise up. They're going to let us keep our inflation, and they're going to keep their stuff. Mm-hmm. And then it's going to hit us like a ton of bricks, and inflation is going to skyrocket, and it's going to be too late for anybody to do anything about it.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's signs of that already, as the Chinese are really, I think, actively selling their bonds. And the Fed is now the largest holder of bonds. And it's all very scary for anyone paying attention. I think if you look at John Williams' work and your work, a person can easily make the argument that the government wants to hide inflation from citizens by using phony numbers so they don't have to adjust things like Social Security and other quote-unquote entitlements higher, reflecting real inflation. They're planning to increase Social Security benefits, Peter, by 1.5% in 2014, according to my local news reader, my local news station. I just find it hilarious. He says, quote, because consumer prices simply haven't risen much over the past year, when the reality couldn't be further from the truth.
If you look at prices, certainly for things like food, utilities, energy, prices are rising relatively fast. And if you look at healthcare,
that's right,
costs, insurance, look at air travel, things are getting very expensive. I mean, they just did the Thanksgiving. Every year they come up with how much does it cost for a Thanksgiving meal, right? And I think the cost is up, 5 or 6% over last year. I mean, how is there no inflation?
Yeah, you make a great point. I took my family on an all-inclusive trip to Cancun, the first time I'd ever taken all my kids and my wife anywhere to do a real vacation like that. It was about 6 years ago, and I think the whole vacation was $3,500. We'd like to do it again, and I think now we're looking at $5,500, $6,000, and it's become a little bit untenable.
Yeah,
and that's real-world inflation.
Yeah, I just pulled up the actual number. So it's 5.9% year-over-year increase in the Thanksgiving meal. And, this is actually, they've been doing this. In fact, I'm going to do some research on this to find out how many years they've been doing it. But a 6% increase is on the high side of the historic average.
Yeah.
So if the government is telling us that inflation is the lowest it's been in 50 years, why do we have the price of a Thanksgiving meal moving up at a relatively high rate? That's probably one of the highest increases in that index in maybe the last decade or two. And I think that's more indicative. And what I'm also finding out that is happening a lot, which is not being shown, is the reduction in quantity that isn't captured in the CPI. So, if there used to be 8 hot dog buns in a pack, and now they shrink it to 6,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't raise the price, the government just says, well, the price is the same. It's not the same. You're not getting as many buns. I mean, there's not as many rolls of toilet paper in a roll. There's not as much toothpaste in the tube. When you go to a restaurant, the portions are smaller. I mean, everything is being contracted. Look at all the money now the airlines are making on fees, right? You buy a ticket, but well, do you want to check baggage? You got to pay extra. If you want to change your ticket now, I mean, the change fees are through the roof. I mean, I remember I used to be able to change a ticket. It was almost nothing. Then it was like $50. Now it's like $150, $200 if you just want to change the time of your flight. I mean, what if you're traveling with your wife and 2 kids? It's going to cost you $800. I mean, it's ridiculous. But I don't think any of this shows up in the CPI because it's not part of the actual ticket price. You don't, yeah, you got to pay for everything that used to be included for free.
Yeah, you're right. And I think it's sinister, right? You've said that the Fed wants inflation to sustain asset bubbles and monetize debt. And people like Ken Rogoff, a Harvard professor of economics, I think he's targeting 6% inflation. And I think it's very sinister because who gets devastated by 6% year-on-year inflation? The middle class, the working man, the working poor. When the chicken comes home to roost, Peter, and this system finally collapses in this currency collapse that you've so often talked about, who is going to be destroyed? It's going to be the middle class and the working class and the common man in this country, isn't it?
Well, yeah, well, think about what that means. When you're saying you want 6% inflation, what you're saying is that money, right? Everything we're working for, what we're earning, what we're saving, that money should lose 6% of its value every year.
Right.
So what you save this year, if you save $1, next year it's only worth 94 cents. And then the year after that, it's worth, 80 whatever cents, 80, and it keeps coming down. Why should that be? Why is it good if our money is destroyed in value? And what people don't understand and they overlook is they don't look at the 19th century where money constantly gained value. The 19th century, the story of the 19th century, which is really when America was built. It wasn't built in the 20th century. It was the 19th century. That was particularly after the Civil War ended. That period of time, the 1870s through, maybe even through 1910, that was the most prosperous period of U.S. history as far as just economic growth, living standards going up. In fact, things were so booming. It was so great that immigrants, millions and millions of people were flooding to this country from all over the world, right? And as they got here, and there was so much opportunity and so much prosperity, they told their family members, and everybody came. During that period of time, we were on a gold standard. We had deflation every single year. Every year, your money was worth more than the year before. Every year, the prices of the things that you needed to buy were lower than when the year began. And it was a boom. That's when the middle class was created, when we had sound money and we had falling prices. We had limited government. We had maximum prosperity. Nobody paid income taxes. The rich didn't pay anything. The poor didn't pay anything. There were no payroll taxes. The states hardly had any taxes. The government was tiny. We had no welfare. We had no food stamp. We had no Medicaid. Yet doctors were cheap. Hospitals were inexpensive. The sick were taken care of. The poor had health care. I mean, we had a great free market economy that was the envy of the world. People were, again, coming here from all over the world to participate in freedom. Even though we had no government benefits at all, the poor people from all around the world wanted to come here. They wanted to come to the country that didn't have a single program for the poor.
That's right.
Why did so many poor people want to come to a country with no welfare benefits, no Medicare, no food stamps? Because they knew that the best way to get out of poverty was free market capitalism. It was not the government or a government program, but the opportunity to work in a free market. And that's what happened. We had a great country and we screwed it up.
Yeah, I'm hearing the bell of liberty ringing through your words, and people wanted to come here to be free. They wanted to come here for freedom. Now they want to come here for free stuff, and it's killing us. It's bankrupting us. And you know, when I mentioned earlier that these guys who won't speak honestly about the Fed, okay, they must know about the Federal Reserve's history, 1913, the establishment of the Federal Reserve, the secret meetings at Jekyll Island. They must know all of that, and they choose not to speak about it as courageously as you do. That's why you have so much respect in the alternative media. Please don't let me forget, I'd like to ask you about the gold standard, but I want to circle back. I want to talk about inflation because you have said that the Obamacare website is fixable. Obamacare isn't. And I think Obamacare, for these people that want free stuff, there is no better example of how, in my opinion, this is being done by design. Cloward, Piven, whatever. They're wrecking this economy on purpose because there's no better example of a debacle than Obamacare. Peter, what's your opinion on Obamacare?
Well, I mean, it's a debacle in the making. I mean, we haven't even seen the full debacle yet. It's unfolding, but it's not like it wasn't predictable. I mean, I saw this problem from a mile away. I mean, look, the big problem in healthcare in America is too much government involvement. That's why it's so expensive, because the government is there. I mean, whenever the government is involved in subsidizing something, it always costs too much, whether it's education or healthcare. The results are the same. And so what we should have done is learn from our mistakes and gotten government out of healthcare the way it was out of healthcare before the 1960s. The problems didn't start until the government got involved. But this thing is doomed to fail because it destroys the very concept of insurance, right? What is insurance? Insurance is where there's something that is not likely to happen. But if it does happen, it's very expensive. And so the way it works is you use insurance to pool risk. Everybody pays a small premium, and the insurance companies collect a lot of premiums from a bunch of people. And then when something goes wrong for one person, there's money to pay them out. So you buy fire insurance because most people's houses are not going to burn down. And the few houses that burn down, there's plenty of money because most people didn't collect. They paid a small premium, but you don't have house insurance for routine maintenance of your house.
That's right.
Because everybody knows if you're a homeowner, stuff's going to go wrong. I mean, your homeowner insurance doesn't cover yard care. It doesn't cover, mowing your lawn because you have to mow your lawn. You've got to do these things. Or the same thing with auto insurance. You have insurance in case you get into a big accident. Most of us don't get into a car accident, but our auto insurance doesn't cover gasoline. It doesn't cover oil changes. It doesn't cover the routine maintenance costs of an automobile because that, you don't have insurance for those things. So what is health insurance supposed to be for? It's not for going to the doctor. It's not for a checkup. It's not for pregnancy. It's not for birth control. It's not for a sprained ankle. It's not for normal things that happen to people. It's for cancer. It's for a brain tumor. Mm-hmm. It's for something that's going to be expensive where you're going to be hospitalized for weeks or a month. But we've turned it into prepaid medical. And what we've done is we've said that insurance companies now can't discriminate based on pre-existing conditions. That's what insurance is all about. If you can't discriminate based on pre-existing conditions, then it's not insurance. Nobody would buy automobile insurance for collisions if you could buy the insurance after your car's in an accident. Nobody would buy fire insurance if I can get the policy after my house is on fire. The only reason I buy it when it's not on fire is because I know that once it's burning, I can't get the policy. So the only reason to buy health insurance is because if you get sick, you won't be able to buy it. So you buy it when you're healthy, even though you probably won't need it. But based on Obamacare, millions of people who used to have insurance are now going to drop it because they don't need it anymore. Why pay for something that you can buy after you get sick? The only people who are going to want insurance under Obamacare are the people who are already sick or the people who are so poor that the taxpayers pay for their premiums. So it's going to take the cost curve of healthcare and bend it further. So we're going to completely destroy the insurance industry, what it means. We're going to send insurance rates skyrocketing. The insurance companies might still make money only because the government is going to be overpaying them for the insurance premiums that are going to skyrocket because only sick people are going to have insurance, or poor people. And when poor people get the insurance and the government picks up all the out-of-pocket expenses, what are they going to do? They're going to go to the doctor all the time. And now they got all this free stuff. Take birth control pills. You can get birth control pills for free now from the government. So what's going to happen? People that don't even want birth control pills are going to get them anyway because they're free. And now they're going to sell them on eBay so that people in other countries can buy the birth control pills from Americans who get them for free. But now the birth control companies are going to jack the prices up of birth control pills. They're going to be very expensive, but no one's going to care how much they cost because the taxpayers are paying for them. And now people are going to buy them again. Women are going to take birth control pills just to clear up acne. I mean, they're going to find all sorts of uses for these things. But this is a disaster. It's a huge disaster. The only good news is the country's probably going to collapse long before most of this stuff kicks in anyway.
Yeah. Well, I worry about that collapse. For a long time, I've spoken with people who, have shared the idea that, what we really do need is a collapse so we can begin anew, build from the ground up, regain liberty, da-da-da-da-da. But I think most recently when we saw this quote-unquote government shutdown, even though the Pentagon remained open for business and there weren't any real cuts, what they wanted to do was close the parks. What they wanted to do was freeze food stamps. What they wanted to do was threaten to shut off Section 8 housing money. What they wanted to do was scare the hell out of the common man so that we would all rally for the government to be opened back up. And
if it really was a government shutdown, a lot of people would have been happy about it. The problem was the government didn't shut down. As far as I was concerned, it ramped up. The government started preventing us from doing things that we used to be able to do. And, if it really was a government shutdown, then I wouldn't have had to pay my income taxes or my payroll taxes. I wouldn't have to abide by all these ridiculous rules and regulations. But all the bad things about government were not shut down. The only stuff they shut down were the few things that we liked.
That's right.
They made us pay all of our taxes, but they said you have to pay for government, but you can't just get the services provided by government. That's not a real government shutdown. A real government shutdown would be I don't have to pay for the stuff either. And a lot of people would have been happy. How many people, if the government shutdown meant that while the government was shut down, they stopped taking income taxes out of your pay? How many people would have been itching for the government to be started back up?
That's right.
There were a lot of people who would have said, hey, I like this government shutdown. Or if we didn't have to abide by all the government laws, all the federal laws and regulations, just the state laws and regulations.
That's right.
We didn't have to abide by all this nonsense. There was a beer company. They were saying, they can't come out with new beer because the government agency that approves the new labeling was shut down. Well, if it was a shutdown, you should be able to come out with all the beer you want, and you don't have to get the permission from the government to come out with your new label. You just do it, right? We would just have freedom in the country, but unfortunately, we didn't get that. No, I wanted to say too, the other irony about the Obamacare, I wanted to bring that up, is now a lot of people who had real insurance, where they had catastrophic coverage, which is what they wanted, where their premiums were low, right? But it only kicked in if they had a really big problem. That's now illegal under Obamacare. Legitimate insurance is now illegal. That's why millions of Americans are having their health insurance canceled. And now what they have to do is they have to overpay for a premium package that they really don't even want. They have to buy protection for stuff they don't even care about because of Obamacare. And again, the people who can afford, the people who aren't, who are earning 40, 50, 60,000 a year, they're not going to buy the coverage because they don't need it and they can't afford it. The only people that will sign up for it are people who are making a little bit of money.
Yeah.
Or people who earn their money, under the table, who earn cash and so can lie about their income.
That's right.
Like I just saw a report on CNN about hookers and strippers who, earn a lot of money, but they don't report it. So now they're going to be able to sign up for Obamacare because it's going to be basically free for them, and they'll get all sorts of services because they get sick. They get sick a lot because of their line of work, but now they're going to get it all basically for free because they only report maybe $20,000 or $30,000 a year in income, even though they probably earned $50,000 to $100,000 in tips that they don't pay taxes on.
Well, let's talk just a little bit about that then. Let's flesh it out a little bit further because I'm nodding my head about the insidious and sinister, I've used that term in this interview a couple times now, sinister nature of Obamacare. It's this Obamacare madness. The original promise and the premise was that every American should be covered. And you know what? Maybe every American should have health insurance, and I don't think you or I are arguing against that. The problem is they can't get it for free. And what's really insidious about this, Peter, is that, as you mentioned, people are being dropped. Insurers are dropping people who have been good customers and making them try to sign up for this thing. And the reality will be, like this one woman in Florida whose insurance rate, her documented quoted insurance rate, her insurance premium monthly is going up 1,000% from about $51 to $591 a month, and she can't afford it. So what will happen because of Obamacare is good people who had insurance won't be able to afford this new crummy criminal fascist insurance, and so they won't get it, and they'll pay the IRS penalty, and it's just a lose-lose because people who were insured won't be insured.
Yeah, the penalty is very low. I mean, that's the only reason the Supreme Court said it was constitutional. They said, well, the penalty is so low that they're really not forcing you to buy insurance. They're actually giving you a way out of insurance because you can pay the penalty instead of buying insurance. And now you have the ability to buy insurance when you can. I mean, again, let's put it back to, let's say, you can buy, automobile insurance and the policy is $2,000 a year. Or you can pay $100 a year fine not to have insurance. But if you get an accident, you could just buy the insurance after the fact and just start to. Everybody would do that. So that's what's going to happen with Obamacare. But Obamacare was sold to the nation based on fraud, right? Barack Obama lied to the public to get them to support the plan because Obama said if you already have insurance and you like it,
you can
keep your policy. Nothing is going to change.
Yep.
That was a lie, right? The only way he can give insurance for free to people who didn't have it was to make it much more expensive for the people who already had it. But he sold it as something for nothing for everybody, right? But it wasn't. It was a transfer from some people to other people, and the people who were being taxed were duped. And in fact, the people who are buying their health insurance are going to get hit two ways. They're going to get hit because their insurance is more expensive and their taxes are going to go up to pay for other people's insurance. Look, the type of insurance that people should have is major medical. That's it, catastrophic, and they should buy it themselves. It shouldn't be provided in lieu of wages by their employer. The only reason that health insurance is tied to employment is because the government did it through the tax code. That's a problem. We should get rid of that. We should lower taxes, and people should buy their own insurance that they don't lose if they lose their job, if they quit or get fired. People should buy insurance the way they buy life insurance or fire insurance on their own, and it should just be for major medical problems. People should go to the doctor when it's a routine situation. When you go to the doctor because you're sick, you shouldn't be filling out insurance forms. You should be paying cash, and you should be shopping around, which is exactly what Americans do for cosmetic surgery or eye LASIK surgery. Mm-hmm. And that's why those types of procedures, prices have been falling for years, right? It's cheaper to get eye LASIK surgery today than it was 10 years ago, and it's better. Why? Because the insurance doesn't cover it. So people pay for it out of pocket. So they call clinics, they call up doctors, they find out how much it costs before they go in because they're paying with their own money. The doctors know that the patients are price conscious, so they do whatever they can to lower the prices. But since everybody has insurance now because of the tax code, nobody gives a damn what anything costs. So the medical industry knows this, so there's no incentive to lower prices. There's all kinds of incentive to jack up prices. And there's no objection from the consumer because he doesn't care if something costs $100 or $5,000 because it's free.
Yeah, and again, we get back to this idea of free. I really do maintain that a lot of people will end up with no insurance because of the fraud happening here. And I use the word fascism a lot. If Mussolini defined fascism as being the marriage between the corporatocracy, the corporations, and the government, are you comfortable with my use of the word fascism? Because I can't imagine anything more fascist than really insurance companies essentially writing a 2,200-page document, Nancy Pelosi saying we have to pass it so we can read what's in it, and then this thing rolls out and it's devastating. It's going to be devastating to the economy, and the only winners that I can see here, Peter, are the insurance companies whose stocks are rallying because they wrote the thing.
Yeah, although it's probably going to backfire on them. Whenever you get in bed with the government, you know exactly what's going to happen to you. Look at all these Wall Street banks that the government bailed out. Now the government's suing them. But I think fascism is a good way to describe our economic system, right? If you understand really what fascism is and how it differs from communism, for example, because I believe that both fascism and communism are forms of socialism. They're not at the opposite end of the spectrum. There are people that think that the opposite of communism is fascism. It's not. The opposite of communism would be anarchy, or what we are supposed to have, laissez-faire capitalism, is on the opposite end of the expression to a totalitarian state, a communist. But communism and fascism are forms of socialism. The main difference between the two is in communism, the government actually takes ownership, legal title to the means of production. So everything is owned by the state, and then the government basically, it's a command economy. The government tells you what you're going to do, and there's no, and they allocate resources, they assign jobs. Everything is done from the top down, right? Bureaucrats decide, what products should we make and who's going to make them, and they just organize the economy, right? That's communism. Under fascism, they don't actually take over all of the industries, but they take equitable ownership through the tax system. So they allow private ownership of the means of production, but then they tax it and regulate it so that a lot of it is controlled by the government, even though the ownership is still private, but the control is in the government. And that's really what we have. We have a system where through the tax code and through regulations, government effectively controls and equitably owns the means of production. I mean, you could take my particular businesses, like my brokerage company, Euro Pacific Capital. The U.S. government makes a lot more money every year from my business than I do. I mean, it's not even close what they make. If you take the income taxes that I pay, plus the income taxes that my employees pay, the payroll taxes, right? The government makes much more than I do because I run my business. Mm-hmm. Now, what would happen if the government just seized my business? Like we went communist and the government took control of my business. They would actually make less money than they make now because they would have to hire somebody to run it, right? They might have to hire me to run it, but I wouldn't work nearly as hard running it for the government as I theoretically do running it for myself. The government would screw it up. So I think the fascists are smarter. They realize that if you want to control and own a company, it's better not to nationalize it, but to kind of let people believe that they still own it, but just control it and profit from it behind the scenes. We don't have the kind of free market that we had 100 years ago because that back then governments didn't get anything. I mean, right now, maybe I get 5% of the profits of my company. Maybe not even that, maybe 2 or 3%. The government makes, all the rest. But 100 years ago, you would make everything. The government got nothing. That was freedom. That's what built this country. When the entrepreneurs truly owned their businesses, nobody paid any income taxes on anything. There was no capital gains tax. You didn't pay tax on interest. You didn't pay tax on dividends. You didn't pay tax on rents. You didn't pay tax on your wages or your salaries. Nothing. How did the government function then without all these taxes? They just collected some tariffs. That was it. They had some taxes on alcohol and tobacco. That was nothing. The taxes were tiny, yet the country was here. Right? We had a powerful, rich country with practically no government. And again, as I said earlier in this interview, that is what attracted so many people to the country, because the countries that they were leaving had a lot more government than we did, and they did, and that's why they were trapped in poverty. They came here and they were unshackled. They had the opportunity, and we don't have that kind of opportunity society anymore.
Yes, you're right, and I want to thank you for your time. You've been so generous here. I've just got a couple more questions for you. I want to piggyback on what you're saying, because it seems to me, Peter, that King George's offenses against the colonies that spurred us to the Revolutionary War were far less intrusive and far less criminal than what we currently endure with taxation without representation, tax upon tax upon tax, which you just mentioned. And I think it leads me to a great question here from one of my contributors, Peter. Peter and Rory wanted to be on this call very badly, but we couldn't make that work. And Peter's question is, Mr. Schiff, when you were running for Connecticut Senate seat in 2010, you're obviously hoping to fix this country from the inside out. There's a lot of talk now with the overreach of the federal government. There's talks in counties. There's talks in states. Some of the states are talking about secession. And Peter's wondering, do you still think that with a guy like Rand Paul in maybe 2016, or they're probably just going to give it to Hillary, do you think this country can still be fixed from the inside out? Or is secession a reality we need to start thinking about?
No, it can be fixed. And guys like Rand Paul, Rand knows what the problems are. Rand understands the problems. I have confidence that he understands them. And obviously, Ron Paul understands them. And if Rand Paul were the president, Ron would be a close advisor to Rand. And so that is one reason for optimism. It's certainly not a sure thing that Rand's going to be president, but it's not outside the realm of possibility, which it might have been, years ago. So 2016 is a possibility. 2020 is a possibility. But I do think that things are going to get very bad before we can fix anything. The public is going to have to be so sick of government. They're going to have to be just ready to barf it up, right? They're going to have such a belly full of big government that they're actually open to the idea that maybe all this government is the source of the problem, because we really need another revolution. And you're right, America under King George was much freer than it is today. I mean, the self-government that we have now is a disaster. I mean, if we were still a British colony, I think we would be much more prosperous than we are today. I mean, if you look at how Britain treated Hong Kong before the Chinese handover, they didn't impose an income tax in Hong Kong. I think if we were a British colony, we never would have allowed Britain to impose an income tax. And so I think we would be much freer, if we had been a colony of Britain than self-governing, because we really screwed ourselves up. And maybe if the founding fathers would have had a crystal ball into the future and they would have seen what happened in the 20th century, they never would have had that revolution. We had this experiment in self-government, and it worked well for over 100 years because we were able to keep the forces of democracy in check, and because we maintained our freedom. But once we surrendered and really adopted a lot of these democratic principles that the founding fathers were so afraid of, and that they tried to keep in check, because that was the knock against self-government. The idea was like people can't govern themselves because democracies lead to destruction, because you can't just trust the public to vote for stuff because they're going to vote for something for nothing. And our experiment with self-government, what made us different is that we constructed a country and a constitution that protected us from the tyranny of the majority, that protected us from democracy. That was the success of our experiment, was that we were able to limit democracy, yet still have self-government and not have a king. And it worked great, but eventually, all those safeguards were removed, and we went we got more and more democratic, and that was the beginning of the end. I mean, and now, look, more people collect a check from the government than are working full time. We've become a nation of people living off of government. We have 50 million people on food stamps. I mean, how are you going to outvote those people? How are you going to outvote 50 million people that are going to vote for those food stamps? It's very difficult.
Yeah, and it's completely 100% totally unsustainable. And I have two final questions for you. This one kind of relates, because it's unsustainable in the sense that, sure, they can print dollars in perpetuity to pay for these quote-unquote entitlements, but that paradigm of the dollar as the world's reserve currency is quickly coming to an end. And this question comes from my contributor, Rory, and he wants to ask you about the Chinese, because, as he notes, the Chinese are importing and consuming gold quicker than they can pull it out of the ground, and they're keeping everything they pull out of the ground. And they've created well over 20 different direct currency swaps, including agreements with some of the largest economies in the world. His question, Peter, is at this point, legitimately, how much longer can the dollar hold on? How much longer can the powers that be keep this thing going as it currently is?
Well, as long as the rest of the world is stupid enough to prop it up, that's the question. I can't answer. I mean, it should have happened already, but it hasn't. The world is holding on to this because, again, everybody believes that they need to export to the United States, even though we're broke. Everybody thinks that they need to earn dollars. Everybody thinks they have to keep their currency from rising against the dollar. So we've got the entire world conned into perpetuating a system that benefits us at everybody else's expense. And but it only benefits us to the sense that drugs benefit a drug addict, right? Because if you keep taking drugs, then you can stay high. But is it a good thing for the long-term health of the drug addict? Or would it be better if he got into rehab and stopped taking drugs, which is what we need? We need the world to stop subsidizing this phony economy so that we can stop, perpetuating it, and we can begin to deal with the problems that we're going to have to deal with eventually. But the longer we wait, the worse it's going to be because the bigger the problems get. The problem is these problems are already so big that no politician wants to, start the process. Nobody wants to be in office when the bad news comes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's going to be painful medicine. It's a bitter pill to swallow. Nobody wants to do it, and the longer we wait, the worse it's going to be. It's a horse-sized pill at this point, and we're all going to choke on it. And that's the scariest part, is because I think the ship has sailed. I mean, it's too late to fix this thing. But to your point, the pain's going to come either way. The longer we wait, the more painful it's going to be. Last question for you, Peter. There is a lot of talk about a gold standard, and there are critics out there who have now been maligning Ron Paul and others for talking about a gold standard, a return to the gold standard. There's also good guys, people that I've interviewed, a wide variety of different people on this subject. Mike Maloney, who I respect a lot over at goldsilver.com, he thinks a return to the gold standard is a big, giant mistake. Where do you stand on the gold standard, say, versus a credit-based system that does not involve the Fed? Give the power back to the Treasury. They can print the money at 0% interest instead of the Fed charter of 6%. Does that have any legs, or is the gold standard, in your opinion, the only thing that we can return to?
Well, first of all, just abolishing the Fed and letting the government just print money directly, which, again, legitimately we would have to amend the Constitution to do that. But I guess, nobody cares about the Constitution anymore anyway. But assuming that the courts just let the government get away with doing something that's unconstitutional, it wouldn't make the situation better. In fact, if anything, it would make it worse. I mean, as bad as it is when the Fed prints the money, it's probably going to be even worse if Congress were to print it directly. I think that, as reckless and irresponsible as the Fed is, Congress would be even more reckless and irresponsible. So that's not going to save us. And the interest expense, the interest that the Congress pays the Fed, that's not that big a deal right now anyway, because almost all the interest that the Federal Reserve collects, it just gives right back to Congress. Right. So it's not like, we lose that money. I mean, most of it is returned to Congress. And so we wouldn't save very much when it comes to interest, but we would probably have a lot more inflation because I think Congress would be even more likely to abuse the printing press than the Fed. As bad as the Fed has been, Congress would be worse. So what we need is to go back to a gold standard, which we can do without abolishing the Fed. I mean, we had a gold standard and the Fed until 1971. So it's not like we have to get rid of the Fed to go back to a gold standard. The question is, were we better off on the gold standard with the Fed or without the Fed? And I would say that we were better off without it. Although in theory, we could be better off with the Fed if the Fed were to perform only those functions that it was originally designed to function. If you look at how the Federal Reserve worked prior to 1916 or 1917, those first few years, the way it was originally conceived, it wasn't a bad idea. And maybe if the Fed had simply stayed in its original mission, it would have worked better than the system that we had before. The problem was it didn't stay that way. It was kind of like the camel's nose under the tent. So knowing how the government will abuse any power that it has, it would make you think that we can't trust the government with something like the Federal Reserve. So for that reason, we'd be better off without it at all and just going back to the type of system that existed before the Fed. And the thing is, given the advancement in technology that exists today, a lot of the reasons that we needed a Fed are obsolete today. We really don't need the Fed because of the computers and the telephone systems and the internet. We actually don't even need it, right? And so I think that the U.S. economy can function extremely well on a gold standard with no Federal Reserve. And that's what we should do. That would be ideal.
I interviewed G. Edward Griffin, and I asked him this very same question, and I said, wouldn't we be better off if we could trust, if we had an honorable government that could issue the currency at 0% and they were in control, and then we don't necessarily have to go back to this gold standard, which, maybe the argument could be that, all the rich guys have all the gold at this point. And he laughed and he said, well, an honorable government is an oxymoron, and that's the problem. You can't trust them to do the right thing. And at least
they won't.
Yeah.
That's why you have gold, because gold is what's going to provide the discipline. It's like, hey, let's have a high school prom, but we won't have any chaperones. We'll just, assume that the kids are going to behave themselves. Well, why would they? It's not in their nature, right? Or even, what about a nursery school and say, look, we don't need a teacher. We'll just let the kids do whatever they want. I mean, that's not the nature of kids. It's not the nature of teens. We know that they need a chaperone. It's that's just the way it is. I mean, I know that because I was a teenager and I needed a chaperone.
Yeah, so did I.
Well, but we know. So you can't trust the government, right? And the founding fathers didn't trust the government. That's why we had a constitution. In fact, one of my favorite quotes from the founding fathers is when the people fear the government, you have tyranny, and when the government fears the people, you have freedom. I mean, why does the government have to fear the people? Because you can't trust the government. You got to keep them in check with laws and rules.
That's right.
Otherwise, they're going to abuse any power they have.
That's right. And I think it was Thomas Jefferson who said the government needs to be tied down by the Constitution. And sadly, we've lost that control. Those ropes have been cut.
Yeah, bound by the chains of the Constitution.
That's right.
But now, there's pretty much nothing the government can't do. The government does whatever it wants. The Constitution is meaningless at this point.
Yeah. It's so sad. It's just so sad. I have children, and this is just not the America I bargained for when I was a teenager or even in college. My awakening happened beyond that point, and guys like you really aided in my awakening, and I want to thank you for that. I also want to thank you so much for your time today. You could not have been more generous. 50 minutes of your time. Peter Schiff has been our guest from Euro Pacific Capital. Mr. Schiff, tell us a little bit more about your gold and silver company. Direct people on how they might buy precious metals from you, and tell us how they can find you online.
Sure. My metals company, they can go to schiffgold.com, SCHIFF gold.com. We've got great prices on bullion, bars, and coins. That's what you need. You don't want to get conned into overpaying for collectible coins or proof coins. You want to buy as close to the spot price as you can, and we're very close. Our markups are 1-2%. Very, very thin, and so we can get you good products. Again, it's schiffgold.com. For people who want a more involved portfolio, they want to buy foreign stocks, they want to invest in some of the emerging markets, maybe foreign bonds, you can talk to my brokers at Euro Pacific Capital. Our website there is europac.net, EUROPAC.net. If you want to hear more of my opinions, you want to hear my take on the market, on what's going on in the economy every day, I do a weekly radio show or daily radio show, 2 hours a day. You can listen at schiffradio.com, SCHIFF radio.com. The live show is 10 a.m. to noon Eastern. You can tune in then. It's a call-in show. Or you can go there anytime during the day and just listen, because we repeat the most recent episode on a loop continuously until the next live episode is on. So I would invite people to go to schiffradio.com, listen to my show. I got a video blog that you can sign up for, the Schiff Report. I put out a lot of YouTube videos. You sign up there. Every time we put out a new video, you get an email and you can come and look at them. And there's a lot of content on my YouTube channel. And again, my most recent book, and people want to read that, is The Real Crash, America's Coming Bankruptcy, How to Save Yourself and Your Country.
Well, again, our guest has been Peter Schiff. And Peter, thank you so much for your time. It's just been extremely generous of you to A, say yes to the interview, and then B, give us nearly an hour. Thank you so much.
All right, you're welcome. Take care.
All right, take care. Guys, thanks for tuning in, and please do check out sgtreport.com and thelibertymill.com, where you can find real news, truthful news, 24/7. Thanks for watching.